long story short, I got in the studio basically on my deathbed and made this incredible like album with my heart poured into it about all the messages that were coming through during the time I was dancing with death and the dark and the light and all that stuff. And then I was given weeks left to live at the point of recording Courage. And then I went on my own healing journey, and by absolute miracle, I managed to pull through and find my own path to remission. And then I got pregnant unexpectedly and had a child.
Hello, I'm Thomas Cam, and this is Making Tracks podcast, where I explore the life story behind a song with the artist that wrote it. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the meaning of music. This week I'm speaking to Abi Flynn, a soul, jazz and R&B singer with an amazing story, and one that's incredibly similar to my own. I won't give it all away, but if you know a bit about my own journey with cancer and terminal diagnosis and so on, you'll get a taste for what's about to unfold. And as Abi concludes the podcast, what an inspiring conversation. This is a really, really special episode, and I just can't wait for you to listen to it. So here's Abi talking about the writing of her song Courage.
When I found out that I was, quite a bit into the cancer diagnosis and things weren't looking very good, I had this absolute lease of life to come through me and put together a band and create an album of my dreams and all this stuff. And long story short, I got in the studio basically on my deathbed and made this incredible like album with my heart poured into it about all the messages that were coming through during the time I was dancing with death and the dark and the light and all that stuff. And then that song came to me when I was actually in hospital quarantine in a room. I'd had so much chemo and I was neutropenic, which you'll know what it means. Many people don't. When your bloods are so weak from chemo that you're susceptible to any kind of infection. And so I was in quarantine. I was like all skinny and bald and probably at my sickest, and I caught myself in the mirror and I was listening to some little groove on Spotify, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so strong. And it was this beautiful moment where I recognized the beauty in myself and the strength in myself, which I realized is something in society that's really, especially in English, and not so much in Eastern parts of the world, but over here it's like we don't acknowledge our own beauty and strength and courage. It's not cool or whatever. But actually there was this medicine in this moment where it was the most innocent, profound recognition of my own strength and what it took for me to be here and thriving. And then I just started singing over this groove. I have so much courage in my soul. And it was like a little mantra, and it was just going around, and it was just this beautiful moment of celebrating myself, how far I'd come and where I was, and how I felt so in love with life in the depths of dark and death. And and then that turned into taking that to my band, and it effortlessly became a song about celebrating the beauty of living and how much courage it takes just to even be alive sometimes, and how much our darker experiences really pave the way to show us how incredible we are and how much stronger we are than we know. And took that into the studio on my deathbed, recorded it with my band, and it was like goosebumpy. Like they played it with so much heart. We didn't structure it much. We just let it come out on the record. And then it was actually a year or two later, when after I was given weeks left to live at the point of recording Courage, and then I went on my own healing journey, and by absolute miracle I managed to pull through and find my own path to remission. And then I got pregnant unexpectedly and had a child, and it wasn't until so about a year later, I was 8 months pregnant, that I finally had the strength to think, okay, I want to make some visuals, because I want to release this song because it's my most meaningful for this journey, and I want to make an amazing visual that reflects that. And I'd met this incredible girl on my journey called Holly, who's in Bristol. Actually, if you don't know her, you should. I can't remember if you do. Holly Wellington. So she's in the music video too. And so at 8 months pregnant, wanting to drive home this message of the beauty inside of all of life, inside of the dark parts and the joyous parts, and finding joy inside of even death and new life. And I just was blown away by this message, and I wanted to get that across in the visuals. And so I'd met Holly on my journey, and she was another singer and songwriter who was journeying cancer at the time, and she was about the age I was when I'd first got cancer, and she was undergoing chemo, so she was bold at the time, and it was mad. It was like we recognized something in each other. Like, she recognized in me, she recognized her, she knew she was going to get through it and be on the other side. And I recognized in her like how powerful and strong she was right in that moment of being in the hardest part. And so we decided to make a music video together to reflect those two sides of the experience, bringing empowerment to all of it. So there I was pregnant, 8 months pregnant, wearing a big gold dress and gold crown, and the director, who was a friend of mine, made this throne and these women around me to represent the part of my journey that healed me, that was about letting community reflect to me my own greatness, because I had such little self-worth for most of my life, and a lot of my healing from cancer was learning that I was lovable. And so I was sitting in this throne, 8 months pregnant, healed from cancer, beautiful women around me, like celebrating me, like singing Courage alongside me. And then Holly comes into the video, and we have this beautiful meeting where we're observing one another and in our own strength. And there's a line in there that's, I feel the warrior rise up and fuel my art. And that was both of our experience was in that edge of death. This warrior rose up and was like, I'm here to make music and sing to the world. And yeah, it was amazing. And you know, being 8 months pregnant, having all these amazing women around me singing my song. And then Holly, like a month after, went into remission, and I had my baby, and life went on. And yeah, just mad. And then I released it, I think another year later than we recorded it. And it was such a long process, but it was just the most goosebumpy experience of true alchemy. And yeah, it took me a long time to even like sink in that happened, that we made that. It was so beautiful.
Unfortunately, due to YouTube's copyright restrictions, I can't play the full track here, but there is a link to the YouTube video of the song in the description. If you'd like to listen to the full episode uninterrupted next time, you can do so on the website or on all podcast platforms, and there are links to those in the description. Hopefully, you've now had time to listen to the song, so let's get back to the conversation. Really beautiful, and amazing to think that, you know, you recorded something so powerful and in a both in a emotional and as a physical sense. I mean, that singing must, you know, well, it's really, you have a really powerful voice as well in this.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that whole album that is yet to see the light of day was very raw, and that's the nature we recorded it was that I didn't know if I had weeks to live, so we just went straight into studio, recorded it raw. The vocals are all really like very heartfelt and very passionate, and had that feeling of the longing to live and to continue this life on earth so that I could just express this message to the world, because it was so burning and important to me at the time. And I think that's carried in the voice transmissions. And yeah, it's beautiful to hear that, because actually a lot of that has kind of not been so prominent in recent years with journeying the chapter of parenthood. And it's less, it's the next stage of life where you're less like, I have a message, rah! And it's a bit more chill and a bit more like, mellow about it. But it's beautiful. We really captured something there that was like speaking straight to the heart. And
it's got that. I mean, that double time at the end.
Oh, my drummer.
I don't know who drummer is, but that is amazing, right?
Luke Campbell, he is outrageous. He just can't help himself. He's too good. He did the church scene when he was growing up, the gospel stuff, and he just went there, and we were like, oh my God. Yeah, couldn't help but people were like, you need to fade the track out sooner. I was like, I ain't losing that double time ending. It's too good.
Yeah. Absolutely. Was that, I mean, is your background through jazz bands and being a singer in jazz bands?
Yeah, I would say I started out in rock bands when I was really young, but I sort of moved into soul and disco and anything soulful and groovy, and that took over. That was my love. And then I one point in my life when I was in my mid-20s, just before I got cancer actually, I got vocal cysts, and that really invited me to explore new colours. And then I found jazz through this new desire to play with tone, colour and character over just belting, because I was in bands from very young age belting really loud, and that destroyed my voice quite a lot. So I found my depth through jazz, and then was in a lot of jazz bands or jazz R&B soul bands, and often the featuring singer for I used to support acts like George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, Roy Ayers, Soul to Soul, people like that, by working with artists on labels, like producers that had their own live band, and I would be the lead singer of that band. So it was featuring Abi Flynn. And then when I was on my deathbed, I decided I'd just been given a record deal, but it was a bit more like Abi Flynn and then different producers making the music, and I decided to leave the record deal and leave everything and put my whole own band together that drew on soul, jazz, R&B, all of the things that I'd fallen in love with through my life. And that's how that band was born, from between rounds of chemo, and that's how that album was written. And my label were amazing. They were like, look, we're not going to hold you to the 3-album deal. You can leave straight away. It's fine, because you have cancer. You don't know if you're going to live. It's fine. True Thoughts. They're amazing. They were so supportive. And then through that process, I was picked up by Bluey and Monique, who's Incognito's MD, and they were big in the 90s, still going strong. And he picked me up to release that album on his label as a support. And I was meant to release it 3 years ago, then 2 years ago, then 1 year ago, and I still haven't released it. So it's very close, but I think I've been picking up new pieces along the way, like the visuals, and I think I've been processing my own journey so much more than I give myself credit for. I didn't realize what it would be to release this album. I thought, I've done it, I just need to put it out. That has been so much easier said than done. The actual release takes so much, because you have to be ready to share that entire thing with the world that you went through, that is so precious and close to your heart and so charged. And I think it's coming the end of this year, but it's wow, 4 years, who knew?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to talk about about it being something you're ready to share. I think my own experiences of leukemia and recovery were that I think taking ownership of my story has been one of my ways of healing. But also I think just when I first came out, it was kind of part of my identity, and I just kind of got out ahead of it. And I know some people wouldn't want to talk about it, but to be honest, I mean, you know, I talk about it so much to the point where people who know me are probably quite bored. I went to a poetry slam with someone who was like, I can't remember, I said, oh, you know, and I have leukemia, and he was like, oh, really? You didn't say that? I was like, and then he apologised, because everyone always does, right? You have to apologise if someone's got cancer. But I was like, no, thank you for calling me out, because I do that. But it isn't like it's not like I'm trying to get sympathy or anything. But it is my frame of understanding, you know, so much of what I do, and you know, talking about bringing something inspiring out of the darkness, and you know, that for me is what I want to share. Is I want to share the light that I discovered through that journey. But for me, certainly to begin with, the vessel to share that was my story. There was loads of stuff about alchemy in your
I just use that word probably maybe in the same way as you. I use that word for what we were just talking about, and like going to those darker places that we avoid sometimes by tragic things that happen in life or whatever, and then finding the most incredible gifts that lay at the center, and being able to journey the places we've avoided our whole life into something so much more, and so much more cracked open and beautiful than we ever would have without those difficult times. Yeah, so most of my music came from that.
I think there's two ways of looking at it, and one is that metaphor of you know, deepening into oneself. And I think I like to think of a well, and you know, there is a Khalil Gibran quote, which is, the deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. And the image I like is of the well. You know, you have to dig, and you dig into the core of your crust of yourself and your experience, and that can be painful, it can be hard work. But then you can fill yourself with more water, and you can capture more rain. And ultimately, you know, water is the source of life, and in this context, this divine, you know, water is the source of life. And to connect with that, one needs to dig deep and stay in one place for a bit, and that can be difficult, but ultimately it gives you access to the source of life.
That's so beautiful, and I really resonate. Yeah, you can only feel as much bliss and the vitality of the source of life equal to the amount of pain and grief, and that you're willing to hold and to go to, because it's there. And it's like the amount that you can actually go there and feel it all the way through is the amount you can also attract bliss and love and creativity and all of those things. And I think, you know, experiences with death, that they force you, I always call it truth or death, they force you to look at a deeper truth.
I like that.
Yeah, because you can't go another step forward without facing a higher truth of sorts, whether it's a deeper truth of the pain and your, like the fear that you hold in your being, or if it's a deeper truth of what you're here to do and what you're capable of. And it's like, if I don't open myself up to these things, then what am I doing, kind of thing. That was my experience.
That's the other analogy. So the first one is that you dig deep within yourself, or, you know, into your experience, into pain, you find beneath and within that actually the joy of life. The other analogy, and this is alchemy, is there is a process within alchemy. There are four main processes, which are reddening, yellowing, blackening, whitening, and it's about like the different processes. You burn and you kind of put together and you dissolve, and then eventually the gold forms. But one of those processes is called nigredo, and it means burning. And so the idea is that you burn away the shell to reveal the light and the spark of gold within.
Oh, beautiful. Wow. I love that. I didn't know that term.
Yeah.
And it's that's always the way, isn't it? It's always like just creation and destruction. It goes hand in hand with like new life and new treasures uncovering.
Well, I mean, in your own case, I mean that's I mean the birth and death and life thing, that's so completely, intertwined in your experience recently.
It so is, yeah, and I've had to journey that again in the last few weeks in a different way, but I always find that whenever I'm faced with something that threatens my entire existence, and I just have to surrender to the process, and I always find something ignited within me, so that I didn't know was there, so powerfully, and that suddenly this the sanctity of life is like highlighted in all these new ways. And my challenge, I only wish I could kind of carry that level of creative cracking open with me without having to nearly die. That's my challenge. That's what I'm working on now.
I know that feeling.
Yeah. Were you like super creative when you were on your journey? Like, were you more cracked open to your gifts at that time, would you say? Yeah.
I think I wasn't necessarily as creative in terms of, I think I wasn't creating. I did write a bit of poetry, but to be honest, during the actual experience, I wasn't creating. And in a sense, the focus was on, I think, surrendering and releasing. And, there are always two elements to creativity. There's the content and the form. And it was kind of, I think the content was developing, the form, I wasn't expressing it, but there was a build-up of, I think a build-up of life energy. And I find that there's a kind of, life energy can express itself in many different ways. I mean, the word libido actually means life energy. It's only Freud who kind of co-opted it to mean sexuality, because he thought that everything was about sex, which, whatever. But libido is just about life force, basically. And the idea is of sublimation. Life force can be pushed in many different ways. And I think, creativity is one, and another one is just the intensity of experience. And one of the things I wrote, I made a one-man show about my experiences called Dear Lady Death. And one of the lines in there is, that close to death, life burns like a star that will not shine again tomorrow night.
Wow. Yeah, that's true. It's like every drop of your spirit is just amplified in those moments. Just all of life is wanting to live itself at once. I can feel that. Yeah, that's beautiful. And it is like every bit of life wants to be lived all at once when you're in that space of what could be your final moments. Or it's a timeless space, I think. Actually, it's like time and the linear concept of life kind of ceases to exist, and therefore it's almost like that film Limitless, where he takes the pill and he's just like unlocked all at once, and you're the super version of yourself. Like, that's the gift that death provides. I feel like because in this society we're so afraid of death or the end, and this linear view of, I don't know, ceasing to exist, and is seeing it as such a bad thing. But when you're faced at the edge of death and the veil of death, there is more life to be accessed than you can ever imagine, and it's so hard to imagine that until you're there. It's very hard to explain to people, because they're like, you're so brave, I would never do that. And you're like, I think you'll surprise yourself.
Well, you'll discover, ignite a light a father within that you didn't existed, right?
Yeah. So much more of yourself exists. Yeah.
I mean, that's certainly, that was my experience. And I mean, I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, so most people will know this, I suppose. But my own experience was with leukemia, and I was told that there was nothing they could do. And
wow.
Yeah, so my experiences of death came from that. And without doubt, those experiences are the most important of my life. So absolutely fundamental and foundational. And my big goal in the last 3 or 4 years since that time has been to find a way to experience that. Like you were saying, I kind of, I wish I didn't have to be close to death to experience those things. Like, that's what I've been trying to do, is to find ways to do that. And I feel like that's been my inner journey, is how do you find death in life, in the sense that, like you said, there is a timeless space that we actually occupy, and it's only through coming close to death that that's revealed. And of course, every moment is being born and dying and being reborn as it is created in every single moment. And it takes actually being close to physical death sometimes for us to realize that. But I do think that there's a way that you can experience that in the moment that we are in, and embracing the death of each moment and letting go. I
totally agree. It's only the amount that you resist the death, or resist the letting go, or resist what isn't you anymore, that actually holds back what you are now, or what you're here to bring, or what life wants to move through you as a vessel, what kind of inspiration or piece of music or whatever it is that you bring wants to move through you. And so much of life is, my experience now since being cracked open to all of this, is how much can I actually get out of the way and let life live through me. And I think it's only as much as I'm willing to die in the moment that is possible. And that's that's a lifelong dance, I think.
Yeah. Do you think that that's changed now you have a child?
I think, it's been interesting. I found so much freedom towards the end of my journey, where I too was told there was nothing more the doctors could do, and I took it upon myself to really heal my own way, which for me was largely emotional and largely digging up a lot of repressed stuff in my body. And whatever you call it, it was pretty miraculous, my healing. And I was really riding high in that sense of freedom and like having this newfound perspective for life. And then when I had a child, I was told I was infertile, and because I had so much chemo, and I had actually gone to get my eggs frozen at one point and was told there was no eggs, there was no fertility. So, and I only had one fallopian tube. For people that know what that means, it makes it even harder. So when I had a child, it was 8 weeks after my all clear, and I was just at that point where I finally had some kind of freedom and understanding for myself. And then it took me on a whole nother initiation, and parenthood is insanely, I would say, more initiating than nearly dying was for me. Like, it was so, like, everything I thought I'd reached the top of this pyramid of understanding the way the way I could unleash my gifts and work in the world and bring my whole self to the world through that experience of death. Like, that vision of being at the top of the pyramid came crumbling, and I was suddenly in the rubble again of this whole other challenge. And I think it changed a lot. Understanding starting to get to learn a more sustainable way of embracing that light and that life force, and that, because life becomes a lot less disposable when you have a child. It's so about longevity and foundations, and also it's not about you so much anymore. And yeah, so it's a very long-winded answer to your question. I think, yeah, it really changed.
Thank you for sharing that.
And I'm still being ass kicked by that. Like, I'm like still learning how that's changed, and how I'm still learning to let go of the me that I thought had like, I understand everything now, I'm free, woo. And like now I'm like, oh my goodness, it's so humbling. It's so humbling. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I think when you come back from that, from really intense experiences, whether it's, you know, health, illness, or the lockdown or anything, it's the hardest bit, I think, is adjusting back into the now reality, or normal. There is no normal, but it's the hardest. I don't know, I found like when I had cancer, I was actually really uplifted and a lot of the time, but then post cancer was really tough. And I think a lot of people in the pandemic are like finding it really tough now, like because you actually are like, you realize how much has changed and you don't know who you are or where you fit.
That was exactly the experience I had as well. Like it was so much on a personal, emotional level. It was in many ways harder afterwards. I mean, you know, not at all to take away from what I experienced, but in some ways it was straightforward. You kind of, you know, you endure this, you know, it's like one challenge. Your life is one pointedness, and it's about kind of survival. And then, you know, it's simple, even if that isn't easy. But then it's the discovering again of this complexity, and it's like, what do I want? Who am I? You know? Yeah,
that's it. Because you're like, well, if I live, then like that's I'm blissfully happy and grateful. That's it. I'm just gonna live. I'm just gonna focus on living. And then you do stay alive, and then inevitably, the complexities of human existence kind of creep back in, and Did that affect your creativity? I wonder, because that, for me, that really got in the way of my creativity. Once I knew I wasn't dying, so many things came in to cloud my consciousness again, and my creative channel was kind of blocked after.
To be honest, in some ways I can't remember, but I think actually I found that was the time when I don't know whether it was a question of blockages, but certainly that was when my creativity really kicked in as something valuable and useful to me. It's something that helped me so much to process and these things. I'm a strong believer that if you can make something meaningful, you can manage it. Human beings are meaning-making machines. It's what we do. That's the unique thing. It's the unique blessing of humanity, but it's also the curse, because you make meaning where there is none. If there isn't a meaning, you feel meaningless. You know, you're constantly driven by the need to fix things into boxes, you know, and to make things make sense and be ordered. And that means that we don't recognize the beauty of the paradoxical, and we turn ourselves away from the unknown and from the mysterious. So I mean, you've talked about your miraculous healing. What is that story?
I think because it was interesting when I first found out that I was unwell. I was getting a sense of something more than just what met the eye in life. I was like, there's something deeper, and there was something deeply wrong. Like, I felt like there was a self-hatred that went so deeply that I was just normal to me, that I was at the stage where I had a record deal, had amazing things on paper. I was gigging like up to 8 times a week, sometimes like twice in a day, and doing these amazing shows. And whenever I was off stage, I was so empty, and I didn't get like what that was about, or like there's something wrong in my, it was, I could feel it in my chest. It was like there was this void. And I started to pursue, I read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, which is a lot of people's starting point, and You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay, which just really opened me up to these new ideas of the way I perceive or the way I think about myself affect my reality or affect my body. And as I started to do that and I started to meditate for the first time, this huge pain exploded in my chest. And, you know, then I went through finding out that that was cancer in a very long-winded way. Took months, and it was 11 centimeter tumor in my chest, caused by Hodgkin's lymphoma, blood cancer. And I knew from the day one that my guidance, but I didn't really know what my guidance meant. Like, what does it mean? Like, there was something in me, an intuition that was saying, you're going to heal yourself. Like, you're not going to do this the normal way. Like, this is an inside job. But I had no reference for what that means. It was like, you know, I'm like the rest of society. I was just like, what? That's no, like, I don't know what that means. I can't trust that voice. And so I went into chemo and all the, you know, the medical treatment, and don't regret anything. I mean, NHS was amazing. The doctors were amazing. But I knew it wasn't my medicine, and I still did it because I didn't have any access to anything else other than that. At that point, I had to do the thing that felt, the most obvious or the safest at that time. And it just got worse and worse. And then there was a point where 3 types, not just rounds, I'd had like 30 rounds or something, 3 types of chemo had failed, and this message in me was getting louder. And all the while I was doing the medical treatment, I had been getting more into the idea of self-healing and what that meant, more into the internal world and the way the emotional landscape of our body creates the neuropeptides that create the kind of the health of your cells and the health of your physical state. And kind of learning more about this and meeting people that had done amazing things and overcome amazing things by changing the way they believed about themselves, and self-love and some regression work and emotion. It was a lot for me. It was a lot of emotional stuff, and I had dabbled in everything before I found emotional work. I dabbled in like alkaline diets and oxygen tanks and vitamin C, and chemo and radiotherapy. I was doing everything. But the point where I found my real healing was, when I started to realize that I was walking around with the absolute well of unfelt shit, like unfelt emotion, unfelt trauma in my body that was like, it felt like it was but where the tumor was, it was like heartbreak and like just this feeling that I was worthless and nothing and just not deserving of life. And I started to work with self-love modalities, in which I learned to speak with my inner child and speak to parts of me that were so out of harmony and bring them into the light and bring them into my own awareness. And rather than living like a fragmented psyche that had all of these different traumatized pieces, it was like bringing them into one place and holding them and loving them. And as I started to do that, I just, all treatment had failed, and I had found an immunotherapy that had helped stop the spread when it was at 21 centimeter tumor in my chest towards the end, when I was at risk of being crushed internally, and every day I didn't know if something was going to give way. At that point, that's when I found the inner child work, and I did self-love training with an amazing woman called Tara Love Perry, amongst many other things. Met some incredible people in my community who held me and supported me in my own truth. And bit by bit, I had this crazy experience where at my illest, I was like on a bed and I couldn't move, and I'd done so much of this inner child work, and I was like throwing up white foam and every time I did, it was a flashback of painful experiences from my childhood or my past that were leaving my body. It was so strange. I can't really explain it. And even if my belly would be full of food, nothing would come up except for this like white foam. It was so weird. It was like I had this experience where I was like literally vomiting up or purging out all of this ugly, hateful energy in me. And as I went through that, I wasn't supposed to like survive very long. I just got better and better, and I carried on down that route of love. And I met my partner at the self-love event, like the second one I went to, and the day before I got my all clear, and I knew I'd done so much work on myself. I knew I had left the paradigm where I needed cancer, like for myself, where I saw that in my reality. I just didn't see that as my reality anymore. I didn't see myself as a sick person, and then I went for the scan the next day, and it was gone. It was just completely reversed, and the doctors were very, very surprised by that, and they put it down to fluke of, I don't know, like combination of radiotherapy and immunotherapy suddenly months later randomly working, even though they hadn't at the time. But I know it was everything I did, but I know it was like changing that disharmony in my body and bringing newfound beliefs and newfound levels of harmony and peace in my body, and loving it every single day, and telling my brain to create a landscape that backed that reality up, rather than one that was going, I hate myself, I deserve to die. And it was phenomenal.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. That's it's amazing to hear it, because in many ways it actually aligns with my own experience. And but apart from the fact that I didn't have like a kind of teacher, or I didn't kind of go through formal. I didn't have a community around me in this regard. Like I had a medical community and I had friends and stuff, but it was very similar, but like completely solo. And for me, it was the kind of culmination of a journey that I'd been on for a very long time. And I mean, I don't know if fascinating is the right word, but to hear that the genesis of this was a place of self-hatred and inner conflict, because talking to you now and obviously listening to the song, it's like you're miraculously feel at peace with yourself, and you emanate that light, and it's something that I certainly similarly experienced. And I had a very long time really, really struggled with my mental health and depression and bipolar and all these kind of things, and I do think, it's strange to say, but I do think that to some extent my illness was a manifestation of that. And something about the nature of leukemia, which is I had, similarly to lymphoma, is a blood disease, but and to do with basically the white blood cells overproducing and other things like that. But one way that I see it quite intuitively, that it's a manifestation of my defensive mechanism, recognizing myself as an enemy, and I think at a very, very profound level that was what I experienced, this inner conflict. And the experience that I had was that I was sat alone in after the experience I had is that I know this story so well. How can I not remember it?
Wow.
What happened was I was sitting, and I could feel this inner conflict that you were talking about, but that profound weight, kind of torrent, dark boiling water surrounding me and below me, and I had this feeling of trying to keep my head above water, and it was I kind of looked down into it, and I realized that it wasn't darkness, and my whole reality was filled with light, a light that could be termed as emptiness in a Buddhist way, but my body was filled with light, and yeah, I mean, miraculously healing. That's what happened, and then I got better, basically.
yeah. Despite all odds. Wow, that's amazing. I love hearing. That's probably the first time I've heard somebody else share such a similar internal experience of healing. Like, not like, it was through, this herbal tincture or through this chemo, whatever. It's like it's just inside, and just that realization. And I remember the moment the cancer actually left my body in a flash, and it was so similar. I was met with that moment of conflict, and I suddenly, a new voice was there, and it was like, you can either choose to have that, believe in that, and journey death, and that's fine, but you don't need to do that. There's a new choice where you can actually choose the light that's there for you and realize how worthy you are, and like just choose that path. And then my whole body filled up with light, and I felt this explosion in my chest, and just, yeah, it's phenomenal, isn't it? It can happen so instantly as well, like when it's ready.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
That's it, isn't it? Unbidden, you know, you can, there are things you can do to prepare yourself for it, to make yourself a better vessel or conductor for it. You know, it's not like I didn't, I mean, I spent years and years and years doing this even before I got cancer. And I actually, one of the first thoughts I had when I got diagnosed, the feeling I had was of this being the culmination of that, because in every hero's journey, every story, you have the apotheosis, or not the apotheosis, well, that you have the kind of that final test that breaks you, and then you realise kind of who you truly are, and you go into the darkness. And even at the very start, that was the sense that I had. And so it's a combination, because it does, like, it involves often a huge amount of introspection and doing certain things, but ultimately that moment of illumination you can't actively seek. It just comes when it's ready.
Oh yeah, I so needed to rehear that today as well. So true. I love what you said about the hero's journey as well, and I ended up designing my album to go in that story arc of the descent and then the rising into the gifts, and I arranged my track listing and made the videos to go with the hero's journey, and the deepest point was where I met this idea of a daughter in spirit, and I knew that I would live because I would have her one day, and I knew it so much, and her name was Alma, and I could feel her, and the song's Alma, and it was that deepest point of grief where I was met with her, and she was like, you're gonna live, like you're gonna live, just follow me. It really is like a fairy tale. And then followed her, that kind of message, or, you know, whether she's just an aspect of my consciousness, whatever, however you see it, I followed that thread up out of that darkest place and into impossible realms of new dawn and healing and new horizons. And then recently she's been coming back into my awareness big time, and I've been faced with the biggest test, I would say, yet in this whole journey, where I had to go and face all of my fears of cancer. I had to go to hospital, I had to face fertility issues, and through that it's been really difficult. But what you just said there about the illumination comes when it's ready, I think I'm at another one of those points now in my life where I'm about to see another level up in myself.
That's exactly how it works.
Yeah. And that Alma, my daughter, future daughter, I hope, is there, like, again with me now, like, come out now. You're ready for a new version of yourself, another metamorphosis. And it's been such a gift having this chat, because I'm in another one of those. I've been in another one of those dark places, and I'm on my way out again, and remembering what it takes.
It's absolutely exactly the same. I've had that cycle many times, but there does come a point, and you know, there came a very specific point. I remember when I had the illumination after illumination, followed by darkness, and initially it was terrible. First time it happened, that I went from this total illumination to back in the real world. It was awful. It was the worst. It was like Jung described being back in the box.
Yes.
And then it happened again, and then it went to this cycle, and more times I was like, okay. In fact, I recently wrote a song, and one of the verses in the song is, even when my mind is mist, I trust the sunlight still exists, waiting like the water in the snow.
That's so beautiful. Yeah. Wow, I really need to listen to your music. I haven't done that yet. I can't believe it. Wow, I'm going to do that. Sounds like it's the medicine I need.
Maybe. Yeah, no, it's that is the beauty of it, isn't it? The music, you know, and clearly this track has been medicine for you, but perhaps even more than that, you know, it's a song that I can absolutely imagine and understand being medicinal for other people, because it's a kind of place for people to come to imbibe that energy, and as an artist, I know for myself that at least that's the greatest hope that you can have for music, that it speaks to someone else and it resonates with the light within them.
Yeah, that's what I feel like I stayed alive for in many ways, was to ripple that out, to fill my own cup and remember my divinity and remember my light, and then overflow that into the world. And yeah, I thought that was going to be an easy journey after I lived and survived, and it's not. And it's a consistent, you know, remembering of your own light so that you can remind others, because when one rises, we all rise, and we're so indoctrinated into believing that someone else's rise is us being less, and it's completely the opposite. And yeah, I really hope that when I do release my album, it's going to have that impact of people going, oh, wow, that's powerful. Oh, that means I'm powerful.
Yeah,
wow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a actually, again, within alchemy, the final stage of alchemy is that by touching the gold to any other metal, that metal becomes gold. And, you know, by any one of us reaching the final stage of our self-discovery, you discover this paradoxical thing of, at the peak of your individuation and of becoming an individual, you are both realize your total uniqueness and your total unity. And, you know, I think if you can be in a place that people can touch that and touch people, then the hope is that you can spread that.
Ah, yes. That's what my album, that's what my stage show's about that I haven't put on yet. Yes, I so feel that. It's like I see the end act of the show, like, just like, you are golden.
Yeah.
I'm golden, you're golden. Just, yeah. It's that felt, it's a remembrance more than anything, isn't it? It's like an activation. It's like, rather than like, it's not me telling you a message, it's me being in my own light and truth, and then you going, oh, catching that activation and going, oh yes, I remember now, this is me, like I'm that. Yeah, we just remind each other of our own greatness, one would hope. When we're in our gift. Yeah. Beautiful. What an uplifting conversation.
This podcast is funded by Arts Council England and Youth Music as part of Making Tracks, a partnership project between Trinity Bristol, Basement Studios and Aspiration Creation Elevation. Thank you to everyone who's made this possible, and thank you for listening.